Supply chain crises are everywhere, but knowledge can help you. Join the Logistics Point, a digital news platform for logistics and supply chain. Subscribe now on YouTube to access free online events, interviews with leading supply chain experts, and more. The Logistics Point.
Would you like to solve supply chain problems faster, improve efficiency, and reduce costs? Visilion Tracking and Supply Chain Visibility Solution gives you the power to make informed decisions so your delivery can run as smoothly as possible. It lets you know where your goods are, if they have been handled correctly, and whether or not they will arrive on time. Visilion provides detailed insights about key events such as positioning, arrival and departure times, late deliveries, and route deviations. It also keeps track of the condition of your goods, if they have been exposed to shocks, tilts, and temperature changes. Visilion comes with trackers with sensors, a cloud service, and a web interface. Simply attach the tracker to your cargo or individual pallets, connect the tracker to a shipment, and you're good to go. Visilion provides you with everything you need to better succeed with your deliveries and improve your business. Visilion. Now you know.
Good morning to everyone, and welcome to Delivering Green, Creating Sustainable Supply Chains. This is the second year of the event, and this year we are focusing on a few different topics. Just in a few seconds, Erik Lund from Sony is going to look at the role of Internet of Things in supply chains and how the technology helps sustainability efforts. Later on, we will also explore the topic of reverse logistics, data in maritime, as well as charging infrastructure and efficiency of using charging in fleet depots, as well as later we are going to focus on how to move away from slogans and receive actual results in sustainable supply chains. With this very short introduction, I am bringing Erik from Sony. Erik, good morning.
Good morning, Nick, and good morning to everybody. It's a pleasure being here. I suggest we pull up the slides, Nick.
Yes.
Or I do that.
Exactly.
Great.
Well, thank you very much, Erik, and the stage is yours. And before I finish with that, before I give you the stage, people who are watching can ask their questions live, as the event is absolutely live. So you can just post them as a comment either on LinkedIn, or if you're watching through a YouTube link, you can post your comments on YouTube. And a bit later, Erik, as well as all the other speakers, will be able to respond to them. Well, thank you very much, Erik.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thanks for highlighting that. I do hope that we can get some discussion going rather than a one-way communication. So my name is Erik Lund. I'm heading up a Sony business called Visilion, and I'm here to talk to you about how to use IoT, how to use supply chain visibility and tracking within your supply chain. Uh, First, a few words about who we are. Visilion, we are a part of an entity within Sony called Sony Network Communications Europe. Sony Network Communication is the division within Sony that is working on identifying exciting technologies within our R&D and innovation environment, and looking at bringing them to market and building business that create value for Sony and for the customers that we are targeting with this, the users that we are targeting with this. Visilion currently is one of the three businesses that is being driven out of Lund in Sweden. Beside Visilion, then two other businesses, M Safety, focusing on providing a variable platform on top of which you can develop specific applications, seen being used very much within pharmaceutical for clinical trials, for lone worker application, and a number of other applications where you want to be fully in control of what you're doing, the application and the data and security around the data with your variable platform. The last business that is currently being created out of Lund in Sweden is Nimway, which is a smart office solution helping companies and users to navigate the challenges of managing people and assets in their office environments in these challenging days. It has been all about pandemic, but seems that we have another variety of difficulties around coming around the world now again that we need to manage. We as Visilion, uh, we are a business that is focusing on providing a supply chain visibility tracking solution. I'll be talking a little bit more about that. But before coming into exactly what we do, um, looking at what we as supply chain managers and logistics managers are facing right now, uh, are really a multitude of challenges. And it's not without reason that I've chosen the picture of not one black swan, but a whole group of black swans that we have to address these days. We need to understand where our supplies are in the value chain. We need to be able to understand if there are any risks that we are exposed to, variety of types of risks, and how we can act to avoid that has an impact on our business, on our production planning, on providing the services and approach to our customers. We are dealing with multitude of disruptions and bottlenecks across the board, across the globe, across the mode of transports. It's really a never-ending story for logistics managers these days. And then turning away from all the firefighting aspect, we are continuously looking at optimizing how we work with our assets, how we optimize our capacity, how to utilize that. We are continuously working on how to eliminate inefficiencies, and ultimately how we can reduce working capital for doing our work. Now, turning back to Visilion, I've said already a little bit that we are a supply chain visibility or cargo tracking solution. So the way that we describe ourselves is that we are a business-ready, end-to-end solution for global real-time cargo and asset tracking and supply chain visibility. Again, depending on who you speak to, then the term for what we do is a little bit different. In our case, that means that we are both focusing on providing the hardware side of achieving visibility, tracking devices, as well as the cloud service that makes sense of the data that is being gathered from the trackers, whether it's positioning or a number of condition monitoring data. What we're trying to help customers with is really to answer three very pragmatic questions. Where are my goods? When can I expect them to be and where I would like them to be? And how are they doing? And Nick, if we can play a video just rather than me boring you in explaining everything, let us play a video that very briefly explains what it is that we are doing.
Would you like to solve supply chain problems faster, improve efficiency, and reduce costs? Visilion Tracking and Supply Chain Visibility Solution gives you the power to make informed decisions so your delivery can run as smoothly as possible. It lets you know where your goods are, if they have been handled correctly, and whether or not they will arrive on time. Visilion provides detailed insights about key events such as positioning, arrival and departure times, late deliveries, and route deviations. It also keeps track of the condition of your goods, if they have been exposed to shocks, tilts, and temperature changes. Visilion comes with trackers with sensors, a cloud service, and a web interface. Simply attach the tracker to your cargo or individual pallets, connect the tracker to a shipment, and you're good to go. Visilion provides you with everything you need to better succeed with your deliveries and improve your business. Visilion. Now you know.
Thank you, Nick. And in helping customers answer these three questions, as you saw described in the video, we're really helping customers to address typically one out of three or multiple out of three typical use cases. One is first and foremost in terms of the time sensitivity of goods, your arrival, your ETA, your ability to understand if you have delays that will impact when the goods are supposed to be where they're supposed to be. It's a driving force. It's a driving force to understand how you optimize your planning, or potentially if you need to take actions to alleviate potential delays. The second aspect is in terms of cargo condition monitoring. Know that you are able to understand if the product that you're intending to deliver to your customers is actually being delivered in the condition that you wanted to have. It also means that if we're talking about cold chain logistics, that you understand, have there been a breach in the cold chain, where did it happen, what was the to which extent did it happen, at which point in time, at which location did it happen, and who was responsible for it at the time it happened. In other aspects, you can understand you're seeing from an insurance point of view, or from a damage management point of view, you're seeing excessive unexpected damages to your goods. Again, it gives you an insight to understand if the way that my packaging is done, if the way that my cargoes are handled, is that appropriate for the end result of my cargoes. It gives you the insight to be able to try different modes of transport, to explore what is suitable for you. We have an example with a customer shipping glassware, whom believed that shipment by sea was more appropriate, but in fact, by being able to understand what kind of handling was happening, they actually shifted all of their transport in North America from sea to rail. Those are the types of insights you get, and the ability you get to work with an understanding of how your goods are doing, what are they being exposed to, whether it's the environmental effect or handling effect, and you can deal with it, whether to ensure that the product that gets in the hand of your customer is what it is as expected, or you can do a more strategic decision what is suitable for you in terms of the flows, in terms of your modes of transport that you choose. Lastly, which is a combination of all, is really dealing with valuable goods, avoiding theft, understanding when there's deviation to routes, understanding if there's indication of a breach of a seal entering a container or a trailer, what can be done about it. And I think all of us working within logistics saw the very interesting pictures coming out of US around Christmas, where we saw, the rail tracks in and out of Los Angeles were littered with parcels, a free serve yourself access to the rail containers, meaning that massive thefts going on, massive pilferage going on. That was of course the extreme case, and something that you want to work on to avoid. A real example from the Sony world was when we were seeing the launch of the PlayStation 5, November 2020 it was by now, where in fact the logistics team doing the launch distribution had a dedicated control tower function doing security monitoring in real time of all the transports that were delivered. In certain geographies, they had security teams on standby, being able to engage if there was any indication of something was going on that was not supposed to go on. So, besides sort of the James Bond aspect of this, and bringing it back to something we can relate to as well, is when you have valuable goods, you want to make sure and understand they will arrive to the secure warehouse, the secure distribution center at time. And if you see that will not be possible, you need to be able to have the insight to plan what you will do with the goods until they can be delivered to the destination. But let us turn for the sort of the general aspect of supply chain visibility, of cargo tracking, to the topic of the day in terms of sustainability in supply chain. So Nick, if I can ask you to play the next movie. So, setting the scene and also setting scene with the video in terms of the role that visibility tracking has in delivering sustainable supply chains. We certainly see that a lot of initiatives ongoing within the industry. Logistics is taking charge. We're seeing carriers investing massively currently, ocean carriers investing massively currently in new vessel types, looking for achieving a net zero or a real zero carbon footprint. New fuels. We're seeing investment development in e-vehicles and so on and so forth. So things are happening. So what can visibility help to drive that? But maybe what is a sustainable supply chain? So in our definition, certainly a sustainable supply chain means that the business interests, the things that I talked about, the challenges we're already working with, are aligned also with the ultimate interest of the planet and the interest of the sustainability strategy that you have as a company. It means what you're doing now, you want to focus even more on optimizing how you work, reducing material waste, reducing transport emissions, and so on, so forth. We are all very aware of the driving forces behind this. Certainly, the last couple of years with the pandemic, and as I did in my opening slide, now we have, our black swans are almost lined up in a row, one after the other, instead of it being 100 years events, uh, mean that we are working differently. We need to take a different approach. Um, Emissions generally and emissions from supply chain are over the top. It is a problem, and we need to do our part in dealing with it. What we can do from an IoT point of view are some of the things that we are working with generally, but creating more insight about it in terms of optimizing how we do our routing, make sure that we don't have a wastage in how we do our distribution, but also avoiding product waste. We all are aware of, I'm sure, when you talk about the typically agricultural products from various geographies in the world, the percentages are a little bit different, but massive percentage is wasted during the transport from the field to the consumer. Um, Insight is helping us to help reduce that as well. And then again, when we're talking about critical goods, making sure that they are delivered on time, or you have the insight to be able to make the necessary action to avoid a standstill of a manufacturing line. You can source from alternative parties or sources, or you can take from your security stock. Um, Again, all a question of slice by slice by slice, we do things as perfectly as possible. Another thing, and the reason I'm bringing up this slide with Anke is that we are struggling with having the right insight to make the right decisions. That means both when we talk about the logistics companies as well as the cargo owners. Um, the whole concept of supply chain visibility is knowing exactly what is happening when it is happening, uh, for you to be able to make the right decision based on exact data. The next level with this, when we talk about sustainability, is take it to that level, which a startup, Icelandic startup as Ankeri is actually helping to understand, is giving the insight on per vessel, per vehicle, per transport mode, what is your exact impact. Um, this is, very much an aspirational statement. We are not there yet. We are all working, calculating our carbon emission footprint based on statistical models. However, what Anchor is leading the way together with others is that we can work not on statistical models, but actual data, meaning that we can have the right base to make the right decision on how we optimize our logistics infrastructure for the lowest possible carbon footprint. Um, it means that we, as cargo owners, can have the decision with our logistic providers, or having the discussion, with our logistic providers on how can they optimize not only the business but also carbon footprint of what they're delivering to us, specifically vessel by vessel, truck by truck, um, plane by plane. Without this real insight, you cannot have the conversation with your provider saying, really, we want to achieve an objective so and so. How do we do that together? And or if you do not want to move down that way together with me, I would need to find another partner that will help me to do that. Again, this is an aspirational statement, but certainly if I look conversation that I have with companies, with executive over the last 12 to 18 months, beside the business, beside the challenges, beside the disruption, this is very much a topic that we are discussing. We have a role, our partners, our competitors and colleagues in the field do very much also have a role in this. Beside that, working with sustainability in supply chain, I think we look at the more soft targets is certainly also aspect of increasing customer satisfaction. Um, that you are an ethical partner, you're a sustainable partner. Likewise, in the current job market, we need to be attractive employers, sorry, and we generally need to build trustworthy brands. And really, with that coming, what are the motivation for Sony for doing this? Besides that, we very strongly believe that we have a very attractive technology that serves both internal as well as external purposes. Then Sony has a very, very strong objective of being among the most sustainable companies in the world, among the most ethical companies in the world, and that means the decisions that we are making in terms of the products that we're putting to the market are very much guided by that. That means that the components that go into our tracking devices, the plastic that go into our tracking devices, we are very much looking at how circular they can be now and in the future. So with that, I will end now. And it is not without reason that our tagline is now you know, because now you know when you have the real insight, when you have the real data, you can make the real decisions, and that requires exact knowledge. So thank you for that, and back to you, Nick, and I'll be happy to answer any questions I can.
Well, thank you for that as well. A few questions. One will certainly be around costs, which is an important word in the logistics industry. How expensive is it to put such a device on every shipment to make sure that you can see everything in your supply chain?
I say it's a moving target. Currently, we are looking, to do mass scaling, mass adoption, where like any other, electronics components, you see a direct correlation in the reduction of the price. But typically you'd look at a cost point, in the low double digit dollars per shipment or whatever you do, depending on how you calculate your engagement, what kind of shipment, whether it's by sea, air, or road, and then in certain aspects, then is this a part of your insurance policy? Certainly, if you look at the value of pilferage of a container with high electronics or pharmaceuticals versus this is a part of the insurance cost, it is ultimately it's negligible.
And the other thing which is related to that is, do you think that such tracking devices are specifically for very high value goods, and then everything else should be left unseen or untracked?
No, absolutely not. We're seeing certainly it's coming from the early adopters, pharmaceutical, electronics, being spread across multiple industries now. We are, engaged with companies that do distribution of paper goods, mass volumes, where the ability to do very detailed optimization. So, are all my loading bays utilized fully? Do I have trucks waiting that are not being handled, and so on and so forth? The value of being able to orchestrate your supply chain perfectly through the insight is certainly driving value for so many different types of products.
And the other one, which is from people watching, is the solution applicable for all countries?
It is by the nature of the logistics industry, then these solutions are utilized globally and are utilizable on a global scale. Absolutely.
And you mentioned something about actual data. How soon can, when you invest in a tracking device, when can you get this actual data that can help you?
Real time.
Yeah, immediately.
This is real time, and often if you coin phrase it, I then you talk about the supply chain agility, being able to make decisions based on immediate insight as one aspect of how we work with customers. The other aspect is in terms of supply chain resilience, that is working with the aggregated data to be able to make more strategic decisions about the supply chain. So, modes of transport, multi-sourcing, relevant partners, and so on and so forth. Vendor performance management, all of those that you build insight by understanding what's actually happening with your variety of shipments across multiple corridors with multiple partners.
And one of the stories you were talking about was around control towers. How do you think these, for example, control towers work in conjunction with the IoT solutions and also with other type of solutions to bring the whole visibility piece together?
A control tower doesn't work without data. So this is one of the missing pieces that the control tower needs to be able to do it work. What I think we will see in the control tower solution right now, where it requires you or me to see or getting an alert with regards to a deviation or feel that something is wrong that should not be happening, that we'll see intelligence moving into the control tower side of the solution, where we'll have a more smart alert or predictive alerts saying that uh, let me give you an example in terms of cold chain transport, that you're seeing a pattern that is happening, maybe combined with extreme weather situation, where you can predict that unless an action is taken, you might end up having a problem 12 to 18 hours down the road. That's ultimately, what we prefer, right? Or you can see some of the escalations that are being done in control towers. Those can be done through working with machine learning and AI, looking at previous pattern, looking at geospatial data for the shipment, and so on and so forth. So, this is a journey that is, we are down the road, but still a lot of a way we are going to be traveling down this path.
Do you think that companies, managers in supply chain logistics are a bit scared when they hear IoT, AI, and all of these words, which
No,
suddenly became very popular?
I say to the contrary. I'm seeing a lot more curiosity from supply chain managers that didn't bother about these things before, because over the last couple of years now, we've all suffered through the pandemic. But one thing as such that has been good for the type of solution that we are doing is that had really put focus on why it's important to work with this type of IoT solution that gives you this insight. And what is interesting is, you contrast it, that during the pandemic, we've seen supply chain management has been promoted from working in the basement being put into the boardroom because it is of imperative, it is of strategic importance for companies to work strategically with the supply chain, where it didn't have the same priority 2.5 years ago, or quite the same priority 2.5 years ago.
Erik, thank you very much. You're going to
Okay.
join us for the panel discussions in about an hour. But before that, we are moving very shortly with Antony Francis, who is a supply chain consultant in Endava. Erik, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I'm joined by Antony Francis, and the video that you just saw was from Gatehouse Maritime, who are going to talk about data in maritime industry very shortly. But we are moving into the area of reverse logistics. Now, just to unmute Antony. Antony, good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Yeah,
I'm
it's
all right.
4:30 a.m. here in Dallas, Texas. So good afternoon for those of you who are in Europe.
Well, thank you very much, and I will bring your
Pleasure to be here.
presentation. Yes, and the stage is yours. Thank you.
Very good. Good morning, everyone. And this is an interesting subject. I've been the supply chain subject matter expert for Endava for about 2 years now. And the Endava is about 11,000 employees worldwide doing software engineering, designing solutions that have been anywhere from the payment space, insurance, retail, CPG, healthcare, and more recently, a focus on supply chain, because it really covers, even retail CPG has a large supply chain component. Myself, I've been in the logistics business for a number of years, and probably last 20 years of my career has been in the reverse logistics space. As you know, so we'll move to the next slide here. It's become this photograph of Landfill is horrendous. Every time I see one of these somewhere, it just shocks me and makes me very angry, quite honestly. Dumping into landfill is no longer a sustainable business model. And I think something that consumers are less willing to accept even today. Perhaps less in the US than it is in Europe. Billions of pounds of usable products find their way into landfills every year, and it's leaving irreparable harm to the environment. You can't say, and you just have to keep saying how important it is to avoid a situation like you got in front of you, where some of these items will just not degrade back into the earth for 50, 60, sometimes they're even saying 200 years. So, it's not like people are digging up, Iron Age items when they go hunting in the fields, but this stuff will still be there, and when people do the same thing years away, and it's very sad. Anyway, moving on. I'm getting used to this little presentation tool here. So, what is the circular economy? It really is. If you look at it very simplistic, it's out and back. In the old processes was definitely around a linear process, which said, well, we take product, we create products, we market them, and when they've finished with them, they just get thrown away. That was all well and good when most of it was either food or glass or things that would actually create over time would be. But today everything's going in plastics and all that sort of thing is just horrendous. The circular economy really addresses how you can repurpose anything at every stage along that process. And when it's done right, it reduces, as we say here, harmful pollution and carbon emissions. And it gives more resilient supply chains and saves money, obviously, through reuse. Examples are, I know of a company here that recycles printer cartridges that are no longer used. They receive those from triage facilities where they're actually doing recycling properly. They melt them down and they create floor mats. They create lots of different products. So we're actually in that circle of reuse of those products. I'm trying to get I have a presentation up on my screen here, so I apologize for that. So let's look at reverse logistics as a subset of the circular economy. Every company has a forward logistics department because they are producing items, selling them out, and but when something goes wrong or someone doesn't like the item, the item is returned. So what happened to the reverse logistics process since the beginning of COVID? Everyone locked up at home, increasingly buying more and more items online. And then online retailers have been handling more and more products than ever, which the consequence of that is there have been more and more online products returned. Here we've got $102 billion worth of online products returned in 2020. That number went up in 2021. Don't have that number yet, but it's going to increase over the coming years. So I put here the actual definition of reverse logistics. I will not read this out for you, but it's an umbrella term. That's everything from getting a product back, triaging it, looking at it, inspecting it, deciding whether you can actually repair it, refurbish it, items that come back under warranty. And then if you can't actually repurpose that item, you can recycle it, break down the parts, sell the items for scrap. Scrap is used. So a lot of plastics now come back into the manufacturing of dashboards in vehicles. So that's a very good example of just how that gets repurposed in the supply chain. And sustainability and conservation is definitely something that is here to stay. As we move on into our next slide, here we go. So just an example, you see the photograph on the right. This is how returns come back. I was actually in a 800,000 square foot warehouse today, or yesterday here in Texas, looking at returns of major appliances for one of the large major appliance manufacturers. And it's terrible to see how items come back dented, and obviously there's one way of dealing with that is not to bring it back from on what we call the first mile back. As these returns have an impact on the environment at the end of the day, when they go into the part that can't be recycled goes into landfill. About 5 billion pounds of landfill waste annually, this is pounds weight, is attributed to store returns. So having a reverse logistics strategy really helps with the underlying processes. So let's look at some of these three items here. So forward logistics and freight costs are very different in e-commerce. As we've moved away from pallet and case picking, a case of, let's say, 24 items would be shipped to a store, broken out, put on a shelf. But now we have got, with e-commerce, those cases are being broken down in the distribution warehouse, fulfillment warehouses, and each pick is now a single shipment to an end user. So with reverse logistics, the reverse applies, but we now have single pickups driving the first mile back into the triage warehouse. And that is very, very expensive because it's a one item back to the center, rather than multiple items going out in the past. As regards, some retailers have experienced much higher levels of returns in e-commerce. It's very easy for someone to order many items, choose a single item, and return the rest. That's very, very specific to apparel, for instance, where people will buy 3 sizes, try them on at home, and send the rest back. That is also, from a marketing and sales point of view, the retailer is quite happy to do that because they get the sale, but they also have to deal with the issue when those items come back. And we'll talk a little bit about the process of dealing with reverse returns in a minute. Erik's very interesting presentation just now talked about visibility into that return cycle, or the supply chain in general, and the use of their tools is really interesting. There is a huge lack of connectivity between players in both the forward and reverse supply chain. The saying of, I know it's coming, but I don't know when it's coming. And sometimes if you've got multiple packages, you don't know what's in each different one. I think Amazon over here has solved that pretty much. I get notifications on my little Echo device telling me that an item is being delivered and what's in the box. Very, very useful. And but when you look at an extended supply chain between the manufacturer right through to final delivery and the reverse of that, the connectivity, we were talking about control towers, having a layer that pulls information out, and Erik was dead right when he was talking about data earlier on, pulling that information up, feeding it into the control tower so dashboards can be produced for different areas. And that's an area that Endava is particularly strong at doing. So let me go to the next slide. Sorry. So how do you align the reverse logistics process with the circular economy? Really, the two go hand in hand. And it helps many of the challenges, the lack of visibility we just talked about, and the reverse logistics process, if it's well handled, is a huge benefit for the customer experience, which at the end of the day is the key thing about this. Keep the customer happy, they'll come back and order more. So you have this customer retention process that happens through, because you're doing a good job with the reverse logistics process. And then today, consumers care about these issues, or I think probably in Europe, perhaps more than in the US, except in certain states like California and a couple of others that are more into have really got into the recycling and triage even before you put it into the reverse process. And then just the fact that it's the right thing to do, and I think everyone is slowly coming down that path that this is something we really must take care of. So there are some steps that we can do to help that process. Most products aren't designed with reverse logistics in mind. I did a lot of work a couple of years back for Shark, Ninja, and Ninja. That is a for those, I'm not sure that these products are sold so much in Europe as they are over here. But Shark is a big vacuum manufacturer. They actually came to the company I was running at the time and said, could you help us design this vacuum so that the head of it can be taken apart, disassembled, reassembled very easily, and then cleansed, and parts could be replaced in those very easily without having to get out a screwdriver and have 25 different items you needed to do. So we actually had a lab that would design product with the idea of reverse logistics in mind. And also, can you do it at home? You can very simply ship a part to somebody with a basic instruction of this is what you need to do. You unscrew it, put and then the other thing in that process design is, are all of the materials recyclable? Really important. You don't want to, as much as possible, how can, when something is finally returned, can we break it apart, get the parts, harvest those parts, and reuse them later on? And it's a simple matter for customers to return a used product instead of purchasing a new one. Trade-in programs are very important today, and increasingly we're having drop-offs and collection points so that people actually solve that first mile issue back on the return process. So at that time, you're consolidating lots of shipments together, and then you have bulk shipment into the return center. Saves a huge amount of money on the front end. And then, of course, one of the issues, and we'll talk a little again about that in a minute, is packaging and labeling of product as part of the service. Can you even avoid a return? So one of the issues we were discussing this morning about major appliances is if a refrigerator is delivered and it's got a dent in it, rather than bring that back to the center, can you offer some form of credit or a voucher? You know, a lot of retailers hate doing credits as a discount on items. They prefer to give a voucher because the customer's got to come back and buy something else with it. But it's all good marketing, and at the end of the day, does that avoid making a return? So analysis, just as Erik was saying earlier on, knowing the data helps you do a lot of improvements in processes, because once you see patterns that are happening, you can do that. So having really good numbers coming out of your WMS system and using some predictive analytics tools that are available today, and again, some AI and machine learning tools are also available to give you those analytics that you need. And then in that case, you can actually reduce returns, you save the environment, and your brand reputation is enhanced at the same time. So you can see on the left here, this is just a photograph of typical triage and storage of probably of returns or some, maybe some forward items there, but that's pretty typical a view of what happens in some warehouses today. And I know there are a lot of logistics people on this call, so I'm not going to explain what you already know, but for those who don't, that's a very good photograph of what happens in one of these. So we use a lot of technology today and robotics to advance forward logistics, but there's no reason we shouldn't be doing that on the reverse side as well, especially as you triage items that come in on the reverse side. As items hit the dock, you can use some automation tools to triage and select those items as to what that process will be once it gets into the warehouse. Today, the warehouse I was in had, as I said, it was 800,000 square feet. 150,000 of it was taken up with return products. So that's becoming an issue for them, because that space they can't put new product, A grade product in, and everything in there is essentially a B grade or a C grade product that needs to be moved out as quickly as possible. So automation tools help sort these incoming items, and at the end of the day, landfill becomes the final resort that anything that you can't repurpose or reuse is there. Sorry, I'm working on two screens here at my home office. So compliance is another important area, especially all the ESG standards, and then the other one is carbon credits. So that's just to environmental awareness is really important, and it's a core value, and I think increasingly companies are including those in their annual reports, what they're doing for the environment, and a whole section in their reports to shareholders, and they actually should be going out, and when they look at vendors, they should be making sure the vendors have those same cultural values and company core values that they should be using. And then from a point of view of ESG, there are in the States, there are no mandatory ESG disclosures here at the federal level, which is the national level. Although, interestingly enough, the SEC has required public companies to disclose information that could be material. So the question there is, what is a material event for investors? And they believe that ESG-related risk are one of those things. And then on carbon credits, you actually can. I've seen a company recently that had built some algorithms that actually calculates the on the reverse process. They've said, well, this is saving all these events on the process, and they actually have created and give back that information to their customer, the prime customer, and they're able to use those as offsets in their carbon credit program. So that's also a very useful step. Moving on to the next slide. There we go. Here we are. So, and another area is the whole area of cost reduction efforts that are available. And I'll give you some examples. If you can strategically route returns to the closest warehouse so they get processed quicker, get back into the market quicker, and obviously in that case require also less transport. So you have savings all along that process. And as it relates to different the returns process for appliances, large appliances, what we call white goods, are typically strapped to a single pallet. Sometimes they have their own specific packaging. One of the issues that happens is for TVs, especially the large format TVs, is that people trash the original box on arrival. So if you have to return it, what do you do? And so there's a cost involved with that, because they have to send a box out to the customer, so it comes back in pretty normal condition. It doesn't get damaged in transit. And then very often small appliances get further damaged because they're just stacked on pallets, and they come back and they're not properly separated and protected for a scratch or dent as they come back. And those are all sort of cost reduction programs that can be put into place. So how do we maximize this retained value for returns? Well, obviously, but it's all about driving cost out and improving your bottom line. But when you resell through the initial channel, you're reselling the item for full or close to initial price. So it comes back in. So in the case of garments, they inspect, they actually have to go through a cleansing process as well, because you don't know whether people have actually worn the item before. And then it gets re-put into plastic. Unfortunately, that we still do use a lot of plastic in packaging. Or they give a discount, as I said earlier, to not return the item. That's also a possibility. And I know Amazon is doing more and more of that today. And then there's all the second market part of the site. So there's a lot of marketplaces. Everyone knows Back Market, for instance, over in Europe is big. And you can then, provided your cost of refurbishment doesn't take it to beyond economic repair, you'd relist those items on a second market, and there are a number of those out there today. In fact, Amazon over here has their own second market. It's called warehousedeals.com, where they sell used, refurbished goods. Or you can recycle and donate. There's a very big program here for recycling of vehicles for charity. So you give your old jalopy back and get a tax write-off for that, and then that gets broken down and stripped into parts and that are all get recycled. So when you return an appliance, just for those who don't know what happens to an item, so first of all, obviously, is an RMA process to actually bring that item back and get a refund for it. First mile pickup and transport to the return center. It then gets received into the warehouse, gets triaged, there's cosmetic inspection, there is testing of the items for instance, if it's an electronic item, you'll do a high pot test, which makes sure there's no leakage of electricity on the item. Very important because it's being used, and therefore you need to make sure it's not dangerous. Then you go through the whole refurbishment process, which for instance, on a coffee maker can be a very detailed cleansing of that coffee maker before it can be put back on the e-shelf as a used refurbished item. And then it has to be repackaged, and either using the initial packaging if it came back in that box, or they have to create new packaging, and then it just gets palletized and shipped back to typically a 3PL who's actually holding inventory on behalf of the retailer. But technology, as Erik was saying earlier, is a huge part in the whole tracking and reporting of each item. So you have a full end-to-end visibility and control of that process. So in summary, we have, for those, this is there's some, I'm sorry, I think I went one slide ahead here. There we are. So this is the one that for small electronics, you have also refurbishment, secondary markets. The significant, in small electronics, a significant gray market out there. So those companies that actually cannot do tracking to the end customer, I know that this person bought this device at a particular time, that is a contravention of what we have here as a R2 certification for recycling, and so that's a big issue. We try and avoid the gray market as much as possible. I talked about garments, jewelry. Obviously, with jewelry, there's big the big box stores like Walmart and other retailers who actually sell jewelry in their stores. Target as well over here does a lot of that. Those are specific return categories. They don't, the Small electronics usually get triaged in the store when they get sent back separately. The garments and shoes get separated and sent back separately. Jewelry, microwaves, interesting enough, is a category that's all on its own. And all the rest gets put into big gaylords and sent back. And so those are, it's kind of an all else category. And the triage and the cost of repackaging smaller items is very expensive. So typically those are sold off as lots to the second market dealers for that. Right, let's go to the next slide. So I'm not very good with my mouse this morning. And then here's, so a summary. So we talk about the 5 R's in reverse logistics. Refuse to buy. This is essentially saying you refuse to buy an item if they don't apply good environmental rules. So you're using recycled products. So you're forcing everyone to get into the game of a circular economy. Obviously, reduce waste as much as possible, and anyone who's a Six Sigma person or runs 5S operations knows all about that. And it is about reducing waste, reuse where possible, obviously, and then finally is repurpose an item if it can be done. And the last result then becomes the 5th R, which is recycling. So there we are. I hope you've enjoyed this short talk about reverse logistics. For those who are new to it, I hope you learned something. And for those who've maybe a refresher, perhaps for some others who haven't.
Thank you very much. And just before we continue, you will be part of also the panel.
Sure, yes.
So people will be able to ask you more questions there. But do you think there is a bit of a clash between what is good from a marketing point of view, what is good from future business sustainability?
I think the whole thing here in the reverse logistics points is first of all, keeping the customer happy so they come back, and obviously you want to keep the customer retention. Is so important these days. And someone who has a really bad experience on the product returns will typically go somewhere else. And so if you're talking about the big box stores that sell electronics or other things, the switching cost today is so easy people are going less and less into the stores and more buying online, and they have multiple choices online. So if they have a bad experience, they go elsewhere.
Well, thank you. A few more questions for you a bit later during the panel.
That'll be fine. Look forward to it.
Thank you. And now we are moving forward with Alan McLeaf from Wallbox, who is going to talk about charging. And I will bring Alan just in a second. Good morning, Alan.
Morning, all.
And as well as your presentation. Well, Alan, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, all. I'm Alan McLeave. I'm Country Director for Wallbox UK and Ireland. So I'm going to talk about depot charging today. I've spoken in the past about some of the challenges around depots and limited power and some of the preparation that you can do at site. But as we all know, that doesn't necessarily magically wave a wand and suddenly make a depot have a lot more power than potentially it has. So power scarcity in terms of at the depot is definitely an issue. If I think about most of the sites I go to, they're probably 3-phase, 100 amp sites, typically most depots I go to. So that's not a lot of power, because to put that into context, if you were operating 3-phase EV chargers with a maximum output, then that's 32 amps. And, quick math tells you that you're not far before you're eating into most of that supply. Not that necessarily every depot needs 3-phase 22 kilowatt charging. Some do and some don't. So what I'm going to talk about today is a solution that we have, which is you're going to hear some acronyms, so apologies on that, but multi-level dynamic power sharing. And I'll go into what that is in a bit more detail. In terms of the depots themselves, if you are, as I say, most legacy sites will definitely have, power challenges is probably the best way I can word it. And, there are solutions that you could get a power upgrade, but it is going to depend on where you are. Because, for example, if you want a power upgrade and you're based around Heathrow, that will be a lot more challenging than it would be if you were, I don't know, somewhere else in an industrial centre, perhaps in the middle of Sheffield or wherever it might be. So depending on where you are, there may be options to upgrade. Like most things, they generally come with a price tag. So this is about looking at how you could really maximize what you've already got, and sort of utilize the power of smart charging. And you'll have heard that term a lot, smart charging. What does it mean? Well, that's kind of starting to get utilized in scenarios like this. So if we look at the challenge, if we put it in a pictorial sense, so there you've got your depot. Top left, you've got, that option that maybe you upgrade. You've got 4 vans operating out this particular depot. You can see here, put my cursor over them. And let's say they do need a maximum power of charging. That could be single phase or 3-phase, depending on how long they're going to be there charging up. But you're using 32 amps per each of the chargers. So you're using up all of that power upgrade, and who knows what the cost of that upgrade is, or even whether you can get it, because it's not a given that every single site in the UK can just have a power upgrade. Some it may not be possible, or it will be limited. So that's one solution. Spend some money, get a power upgrade. Some of the other options, so on the right here, you've still got your 4 chargers, but your site's limited to 60 amps. That's all you've got. I'd say that's not an unrealistic scenario. You can see this. So maybe what you do is you put some power sharing and you limit these chargers to a maximum of 30 amps each. So you plug in 2 of your vans, and then 2 of your chargers don't get used, or have to wait until these ones are fully charged until you can plug your next one in. And as we all know, if your vans are parked up overnight, no one's going to stay there all night and just keep shuffling vans around. So that's not necessarily the most practical either. Bottom right, you keep your 4 chargers. Now you spread your charge that you have available, the 60 amps, evenly across the 4. So you have your 4 vans now all plugged in at the same time, and they're broadly speaking running on about half charge. So maybe they can normally charge at 7.4. In this scenario, maybe they're charging at 3.7, or if that is 3-phase 60 amps, then maybe you can run them at sort of twice that speed. So you can imagine there's a bit of juggling here, and in terms of any depot trying to adjust for the future, this is all well and good. There are options here, but the minute you go into van number 5, you're into a different scenario again, because then potentially you've got 60 amps to share across 5 vehicles, 6 vehicles, and so on and so on. So the problem will only get worse, not better, unless you definitely know that your depot will never exceed that number of vehicles, routes, etc. So this is generally the problem that I see very often. So why do we need this multi-level dynamic power sharing that I'm talking about? And I'll go into what that is in a bit more detail in a second. But essentially, there's, I guess, 3 main reasons. One is you want to keep the lights on, and that's a bit dramatic. But if you do run a bunch of vans charging at above the maximum power level of your site, at best what's going to happen is those chargers are going to trip. So in other words, they're not going to charge. You're going to come back the following morning expecting fully charged up vehicles ready to go en route, and they won't be. So that's a nightmare. No one can have that, because that's going to interfere with your business. You can reduce the investment that you need for that electrification piece. So that's about, do you want to spend loads of money getting a power upgrade, or do you want to maximize what you've already got there, which is kind of links into point 3, which is saying, well, you do have power there, and assuming that's a reasonably sensible level. So going back to the typical depots I see, if that's this sort of 3-phase 100 amps, or roughly speaking 69 kVA, which is a very typical site, it's about making sure that you're not just utilizing that, but doing it in a smart way around the routines of your actual vehicles. So if we look at this one, so in pictorial sense, this is how it works. So essentially, you've got a lot of the clever stuff going on is a linking from the cloud. Then at a more local level, you've got essentially either on site or it could be remotely, your headquarters, depends how you want to set it up. But you've kind of got the access there to go into the Sirius software and effectively set your hierarchy. So you can see here, we've got a building. So let's just imagine this is a depot, but it could be more than that. It could be a depot, it could be a production facility, it could be offices, it could be all of those things. So you've got the building, you've got a connection into the grid that's going into that building. You've potentially got meters at different points, but that will depend. And some of that is meter in terms of tracking what energy you're using. And some of that refers to some of the technology that we would use to sort of put meters on the chargers themselves to be able to control them. But effectively what you've got is your power supply coming in from the grid. Maybe you're lucky, maybe you've got solar power as well on the building, or battery storage. That will be a very futuristic depot, but that would help. But at the end of the day, you've got a maximum amount of power. But here what we've got is just 3 groups of chargers, let's just say. And each one of these is obviously plugged into a different vehicle, which is on a different route, different time schedule maybe. And really what we're talking about here and how Sirius works is looking at this software over here and saying, okay, based on, I don't know, these 3 vans here on the first cluster, so cluster 1 that you can see, maybe they're the ones that either come back first, or maybe they go out first, or maybe they've got the longest runs. And you might decide, actually, do you know what? These are my priority. So whatever power I've got, I'm going to focus it here first. And then maybe cluster 2 is vehicles that come in later, go out later, go on shorter runs that are less of a priority than cluster 1. And then maybe cluster 3 down here, similarly, is less of a priority than cluster 2. So you can play with this via the software. And that gives you some future proofing, because of course in the future, guess what? These vehicles are doing these runs, but you win new contracts, you get new customers, and now cluster 2 are going a lot further than they were before. So maybe you have to shift this around and decide, actually, cluster 2 is now my priority, not cluster 1 so much. Or maybe I'll put new electric vans in on cluster 1, which go further. Therefore, they're not as much of a priority because they've got bigger batteries and can do more mileage. So I'm not as concerned. So there's a lot of sort of future proofing that you kind of have to think through. But in essence, it just gives you the ability at that site to make sure that you're not exceeding your maximum supply, because that's not a good situation to be in. You're making use of what you've got, but also you're setting some rules behind that. And that can go across AC chargers, DC chargers. So this isn't about having to have all of the same charger. It's not about that, because you may have a depot that's got some chargers today, and then tomorrow you want to put in some wallbox chargers and a DC charger. What this will give you is an ability to control all of that. So in terms of, I won't go through all of this and bore everyone to death, but if I just pick out some of the highlights here, I just talked about, your typical depot that maybe put a couple of chargers in a couple of years ago. Now maybe they're putting some more, maybe considering DC, whatever it might be. You've got this, our system is hardware agnostic, and it uses what's called Open Charge Point Protocol. And you may have heard OCPP referred to in the past and maybe not understood exactly what that means. But basically, it gives an ability to link and communicate to different chargers through the same protocol. Essentially, it just makes it an easy way to communicate with a bunch of different chargers, but to put them under that same software control. Another important point is integration with solar PV and batteries if you happen to have them. I'll talk about a little bit more detail in a second when I kind of show you some of the outputs. The other interesting thing is that this can work with unidirection. So a normal charge point that just sends power to the vehicle is what we call unidirectional. It's just charging the vehicle, but we have the technology for bidirectional charging, which means you can take energy from your building and send it to the vehicle, or you could take it from the vehicle and send it back to either the grid or to the building. So that gives you some other flexibilities that, again, I'll touch on in a second in terms of how that can work. So this just shows here how you would set that up. So you can see in the example here, we've got a group of different supplies, so a maximum supply of 150 amps, but you've got 3 groups of chargers here that have a maximum output of 100 amps for cluster 1, 80 amps for cluster 2, and 60 amps for cluster 3. Quick math will tell you, well, hang on a minute, 240 is a lot more than 150. So straight away, it's why these are in red. If you just turn these on full beans and just try charging your vehicles, they're going to trip. So as long as the electrical stuff's been set up correctly, you are going to end up with a circuit basically shutting down, just not able to operate because you don't have that power. And again, that worst case scenario of coming back the following morning and saying, oops, some of my vans haven't fully charged. So that's your risk. But however, what we have here is Sirius operating in this blue line here as that software interface, if you like, that then is organizing these clusters depending on what your priorities are. So you've gone in, you set your hierarchy, and again, a bit like the last example we looked at, you've said for cluster 1, they're my priority. I'm going to give most of my available power to them. Cluster 2 is not as important, but I'm still going to give them something. And then cluster 3, slightly less important. Again, this could be, as I say, because they're going out later in the day, because they go on shorter runs, or whatever it might be. Lots of reasons why you'll have different priorities in your fleet. So what that is doing, you can see up here, you can see your total power. And this is quite a simplistic example because we haven't even factored a building in here. So this could be the total supply of the building, and it could be these are charging overnight. So it could be there's relatively little demand on that building aside from the charging. So it could be that there's 10 amps left over and there's a maximum limit that's been set across them. It just says never go above 140 amps. So that's all stuff that can be changed. So, and what you'll see here, this is dynamic. So what you're going to get is cluster 1 are your priority and they're getting more power shared. So they're going to charge up probably before cluster 2. And the reason I say probably, it depends what the vehicle comes back with. It could be that cluster 2 come back with more energy left in the battery, and that's why they're a lower priority. But here, what you're probably going to see is cluster 1 vehicles charge first. And then what happens is that 100 amps is no longer being used. And then what the software will do is allocate that according to your next levels of priority. So cluster 2 is your next priority. So then you're going to transfer, it could be all of the 100 amps into cluster 2, or maybe it shares it between cluster 2 and cluster 3, but on a 60-40 split or whatever it might be. So you're always making use of that power, not having to make any manual adjustments, move vehicles around or whatever, because typically it could be that these are charging overnight. So that's happening in the background, depending on the rules that you've applied. And in terms of what is that doing, if you look at, and forgive me for going slightly on the technical side, but effectively you've got 2 graphs here. The one on the left, this is a depot where vans in this example are coming back at 9 o'clock at night and then potentially plugging. In a typical depot environment, what you'd see is vans come back, everybody plugs in, and you get this massive spike. So you just get everything trying to go full beans, and if you've got enough power, they will, and you get this massive surge in demand. And then once they start to finish charging, that peak ends, and then you see the power drop off into that early part of the morning. That's not great for the grid, and that won't shock you. On any industrial estate, where there's one depot, there are dozens of depots. There's never just one. So you could have several sites all on one grid, all repeating this, which is not going to help the local grid. And then you are going to have a problem with keeping the lights on because that demand is so sudden. What we do with the power sharing elements and that prioritization, what you're seeing is in this second graph, not everything has to come on straight away and go bananas. So the priorities come on first of all, they get charged. Once they get fully charged, they drop off. That power then gets transferred across the next one. So instead of this full beans and then, everything, then nothing, here you've just got a more consistent charging pattern. And that's how we're able to sort of protect the site and try to get that more economic use, but also trying to do it in a way that means when that van needs to go out, it's ready. It's got enough power in it to do the job it's meant to do. So that's one of the benefits in terms of, I guess, protecting the grid and to a secondary degree, your depot. This one here is showing that demand in tally with a building or a production facility. I mean, if we look at the timings across the bottom, what you're seeing in the white bit here is the demand of the building itself. So here you're seeing a lot of power being used at night. So let's assume this is a production facility, not just your typical sort of office. You're seeing a bit of peak during the day, maybe where office staff come in. that's dropping off towards the evening, and then something's happening overnight, whether it's production or sorting facilities or whatever it might be, but some sort of big energy use. But what you can see with the power management of our software is you've got your cap at the top. That's the maximum power this particular site has got. And then the difference between the two is how much energy is available for charging. So you can see here in those early hours of the morning through to sort of 8 o'clock, something like that, there is a lot of power. So ideally, depending obviously how your depot works, that's where you're trying to do the majority of your charging. You can then see through the day, and particularly during this peak at night, there is very little available. So whilst it will get some, and you can see it will roll with the relative peaks of the building, it will release what it can when it can. So you never go above that cap. You're getting as much as you can. And it's that kind of analysis that you need to do in the very first place, just to make sure that your site does have enough power to do all of the things that it needs to do. As I say, this particular example is a complicated one of multiple uses going on. Could be in most depots I go to, it's relatively light use of other electrical things, and the vehicles are coming in at a set time, plugging in, and then leaving on their runs at set times, and then coming back at pretty predictable times. Now, this one here, if I just touch on this briefly, because I sort of alluded earlier on to some sort of different functionality. So top left, these are some of the outputs from Sirius itself. The top left, and this is actually an output from our headquarters in Barcelona. What we can see here is our site happens to have solar panels. So what you see is a big amount of solar production going on through the sunny part of the day. No surprise there. But what you're seeing in terms of net impact that has, it's obviously taking the building below zero level. Zero level is kind of shown here. But what you're trying to do, this is essentially excess solar generation. So if you did nothing, then either that's not being used, or it's being sent back to the grid, or you would take it and put it into your vehicles, but only if your vehicles are there between the hours here of sort of 11 o'clock through to 5 o'clock. If your vehicles aren't there, that's not a lot of use to your vehicles. So maybe you're either putting it back to the grid, or if you have battery storage, maybe you're putting that into battery storage. So when the vehicles do come back later on, you're able to boost your output through those batteries. I mean, the other side of this is to kind of think about your depot fleet, depending on how they run around, but they are batteries on wheels. So that is the other side of this. If you are fortunate, if you do have spare vehicles at a particular depot, you might have one or two. If you had this scenario, then maybe you could put that excess back into those so that they're ready to go for the following day. They're good to go. And then the vehicles that come back, you don't necessarily need to have all of them 100% because you've already got 2 fully charged vehicles. What we've got on the right-hand side is kind of showing how you've kind of got your limit here. You can see the straight line that goes across the top because that limit never changes. But interestingly, technically, you've got usage going above that limit, and you're thinking, well, how can that be? Well, that's because there's power stored in the batteries, which is then being discharged to basically offset that increased demand. So again, where you have these other elements that you're able to add into that, our software works with all of that. So other than just managing the power share and prioritizing, there are other clever bits. And these are not future things. This exists today. This happens today. This is not some future concept. Everyone's going, oh yeah, this will be amazing when it happens. This is already here and working. At the bottom, you're looking at your fleet. So you're tracking those vehicles. You want to see what the status of charges across the vehicles, or just look back at a log to see when a charge is coming on, when are they going off, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot more detail behind the scenes as and where you need it. And we have a big screen up in our Barcelona office where all staff can basically see the building throughout the day and exactly what's going on. So it's a very, very useful sort of output, a good visual guide, but you can imagine there's a lot of data behind this that you can output as well. So that's kind of it for me. I'm trying to, as best I can, keep to time, slightly late. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those now. The other thing I'd like to end on is for this depot solution. We're running trials now in Europe And if anybody out there is interested, and my contact details were just up on the screen, please do get in touch, because we're looking to run some pilots in the UK. So if you've got a depot site, you might have some chargers, but you want to put more, this solution might be able to help you, and it would be good for us to sort of work with you to kind of prove that this works, get it up and running. As I say, in the solar battery storage type scenario, that one's already proven, but this is putting it into depots and testing it out properly for real against different schedules and what have you. So yeah, please do reach out if you want to talk about that. Otherwise, I'll hand it back to Nick.
Well, thank you very much, Alan. And a few questions on this. Does the system take into account what is happening in the depot and how much the depot needs? The depot yes. needs energy.
Yeah, it's effectively adjusting to the building, because the building has a maximum capacity, and what goes on throughout the day in that building will vary depending on what else is done there. Most depots I go to, it's generally light, maybe some heating, although a lot of that will often be gas, and then some computer use or whatever. If it's a production site or a sorting site or something like that, then there'll be probably more energy use. So it will always look at that first, and whatever is left over and above that is what it will share back with the EV chargers, i.e. so you can never exceed your maximum, which is the whole point, to keep it within those constraints. But you're getting the maximum whatever's going on in that building.
And we also spoke earlier about how does it choose what to happen, as in how does it choose this is the one that needs to be charged first and this is second, and so on.
That's through the software, and that's through the hierarchy, and the customer has full control over that. So, we would help them set it up, and then after that, we can set the starting priorities, but further down, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, as they add more electric vans, trucks, whatever, those priorities will change. So that's at their fingertips, and quite literally they can go in, make changes, which basically goes up to the cloud, back into the system in a matter of seconds. So it's very responsive.
And I just also want to bring this question, which is electric cargo bikes use around 1% of the power of a 3.0-ton electric van and can do the same work within a tightly defined radius. So why not use cargo bikes then?
That's up to each depot. That's not my decision. It doesn't matter if you think about, if you've got a depot of the future and it is running, I don't know, cargo bikes, vans, cars, trucks, and let's say they're all electric, this principle is still relative, because all that happens is those cargo bikes being plugged in are being picked up as part of the supply to the building itself. So you still need to keep within your constraints. So it doesn't matter how you diversify your vehicles. And I take their point in terms of trying to balance out the demand of that particular depot. Could they use more efficient vehicles? That's definitely a valid question, assuming they hold the same amount of cargo, of course.
And the other thing is, can it solve all the problems, or is it just part of the solution when it comes to energy and power consumption?
Yeah, it's not going to solve all scenarios, for sure. If I go back to a typical depot I see of three-phase supply, maybe 69 kVA, and then somebody says to me, yep, I need 50 chargers and I want 5 of them to be DC. This is not going to solve that, because that's a scenario where you need massive amounts of power to work at any sensible level. But having said all of that, it could be that they say, oh yeah, but the DC units are used during the day, the AC units only get used at night. So it could be, actually, it's the perfect scenario for what we've talked about, because then your prioritization becomes, well, AC chargers just don't go on at all during the day, the DC do, but then at night the DC go off and then the AC come on. So that's exactly what this is designed to do, is to prioritize, because I have seen some examples where that was the case, quite literally during the day and during the night, 2 different sort of phases of usage and types of usage.
Alan, thank you very much for your time. And we will be moving forward, but people can also learn a bit more from Alan and also everyone else who's been so far on today's event after we finish with more emails and information. Alan, thank you very much.
Thanks all. Cheers, Nick.
Now, we are moving forward, looking into ocean data. And just before, I am saying good morning to Thomas from Gatehouse, and I also bring his presentation. And we're going to look into how ocean data can be used to help us in the sustainability battle in supply chain. Thomas, thank you very much, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here on the logistics point. So I'm going to talk about transparency within ocean data. And as you all know, that there's a huge amount of containers being shipped every day, and the volume is increasing. Part due to COVID-19, that there was a huge spike in the amount of containers being shipped from China to US and many other places in the world. And these container ships, they actually emit quite large amounts of carbon emissions. It's really huge sums. Some of the bigger carriers are emitting equal amounts to carbon emissions equal to smaller countries in the world. So it's not trivial stuff. They actually are a big source of the carbon emissions from the globe. What I'm going to touch upon today is our in Gatehouse Maritime's Ocean IO data platform, how it tries to provide this transparency to give the shippers, the cargo owners, the ones shipping the containers, visibility of what is the greener choice. And to talk about that, what services do we have to provide this carbon emission transparency? My name is Thomas Donslund. I am the CTO at Gatehouse Maritime, a company vested in creating transparency in the ocean supply chain space. I come from a background in the digital area for platforms, ecosystems, but also cloud, big data, analytics for many years. And I'm really privileged to work in this area here because it is something that can really help move the needle to have this transparency. So the first point is, if you see on the left part of the figure here, you can see that the container volume is going up year on year. And this container volume is measured in something called TOI. It's short for 20-foot equivalent. So each container vessel can carry maybe 10,000 of those containers. So it's quite many containers that have been transporting. And you can see from the graph that the number is just going up, and even if you look a bit forward into the future, it will also increase. And in fact, some statistics show that ships will carry out more than 3/4 of all goods by movements in 2050, and this will lead to a tripling of maritime trade volumes. So this is really big numbers, and it's becoming a bigger problem. Also because that the maritime transport industry emits about 940 million tons of CO2 annually. This is 2.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So this, again, is quite significant. This primarily comes, or a big source of this is from container carrier lines. And for sure, at this current pace, these logistics emissions will at least double by 2050 and again undermine the Paris Agreement. So there is an upside here. There is a potential to really make a difference by going in and reducing this carbon emission cost effectively. And how to do that? Because everybody is focused upon this. The container carrier lines, they actually are quite also focused upon this. They have a clear agenda to go to a zero emissions by a certain year. So all of them has this kind of focus. But for a cargo owner, a shipper, how do you pick the least polluting line if you have to move your stuff from one country to another country? What is your options? And to do this, we need monitoring, reporting, verification of these CO2 emissions. So it is clear what is the greener choice of these multiple choices you have, which is a greener port to go to. And to do that, we need data. And this is where we come in. Because in Gatehouse Maritime, we are a leader in ocean visibility solutions. We help global supply chains, offshore industries, authorities, surveillance companies by providing them advanced data ocean insights, again for this transparency, efficiency, and also sustainable navigation. And if this data was not available, you would not know which choice was the greener choice of 2 or 3 carrier lines, because it is hard to get to. And how do we get to that? So we have built up an ocean data foundation of over 300 billion data points, basically, which could be positions of vessels over the long history. And every day we are adding 150 million new data points to this. And all these data points, we run through our different kind of analytics and prediction models to get to this kind of insights, to get to this kind of calculations, showing that this vessel has indeed moved that distance, it stopped there, moved into that port, and in the end, it produced so many tonnage kilometers that can go into a CO2 calculation. We also are geofencing many of the major ports in the world, meaning that we know when a ship is moving into an anchorage area, we know when the ship is putting into berths. And that information is again vital in terms of picking up the least polluting port to go to, because they are not equal. Some ports you have to wait a long time, and some ports you can go right into. And the longer time you wait, the more you pollute. We also are tracking all the container carrier vessels and many other vessels around the world for our customers to keep this visibility and transparency of what's going on. And all this data we collect. So we collect data from carriers. We also collect data from some satellites and something called terrestrial AES. And AES stands for Automatic Identification System, API integrations, and also third-party integrations. So we do collecting multiple data, as much data as we can. And all this data we clean, we make it into a unified structured format, so we can do our calculations on top of those. Because else it will just be data in one format from one source, data from a satellite and another source, and so on. And they need to be in a harmonious format to get to this kind of unique insights. And we also fuse the data sources together, because often what we see for ocean supply chain is that it's very hard to get the full picture from one source. So we could have, for instance, one source saying the ship is here, but we also need to know where the ship is actually going, or what is the next destination for the ship, etc. And this we combine into, for all the multiple sources, to create this full picture of the journey of the vessel, full picture of an asset, it could be. And that can be run through machine learning algorithms and so on, where we turn out predictions, analytics, and insights. But an output here is also this vessel number B actually emitted so many tonnage kilometers for the CO2 calculation. So that is one of our concrete outputs we turn out as data, which can be used for a cargo owner to put into calculation, giving them the transparency, which is a greener route, which is a greener vessel to take. If we move a bit further to one of the services, this is AES tracking, and this is something we have been doing for Gatehouse Maritime for the last 9 years. And AES stands for Automatic Identification System. So by law, every vessel of a certain size has an AES transponder, and this transponder continuously transmits the current position, the heading, etc. of the vessel. So by collecting this transmission through satellites and land stations all around the world, we get to a real-time location of the vessel. And this is of course not, it maybe sound a bit trivial, but there's extensive like cleaning and scrubbing of the data, as well as extrapolation to be done, and predictions of the data all the time to get to this picture. And at the bottom here, we have shown an example of a ship traveling south of India, and you can see that there's multiple data points here for the ship, and each of these data points marks a leg of the journey where there was a certain speed, a certain heading, and so on. So we can go in and see exactly where has the ship been, how far has it traveled, what was the speed, did it stop, how long did it stop, etc., which port did it visit, and so on. So this we show in real time for vessels. We also go in and say, what is the future route of the vessel? Meaning this is actual, but it could also be what is the planned or predicted route for the vessel. And this is again interesting because for a cargo owner shipper, somebody who needs to send a container, they need to be able to pick the greener choice. We need to get to this kind of transparency, and this transparency is something captured in something called Global Logistics Emissions Council framework. So basically, Global Emissions Council, Logistics Emissions Council framework, have made like a formula of how to calculate how much CO2 is emitted for a journey, and it's like a collaboration between many different companies and institutes coming up with this kind of huge document describing how to measure carbon emissions for different kind of logistics, both ocean but also on road, air, etc. And having this number as a cargo owner, somebody who wants to ship the container or a shipper, gives them the option to say that if I go by this route from point A to point B, I emit with this vessel so much carbon, but if you go by the other route, then you can actually maybe emit 20% less if it all goes as planned. And this is again really important information, because you actually are giving the cargo owner, the shipper, the possibility to select the green choice to reduce CO2 emissions. And how are we doing that? So again, this Global Logistics Emissions Council framework, GLEC, has multiple scopes, and scope 3 is for ocean and inland waterways. And it basically says that you have to capture the actual distance traveled, stops, speeds, port calls, all the things you need to know, along with how much tonnage was transported. And if you do this, and you also add in how much fuel was consumed, which type was it, etc., then you can calculate a fuel or CO2 intensity factor, giving you this kind of green number, giving the cargo owners, the consumers, the option to choose the least polluting route. And what we do in Gatehouse is we try to come up with this tonnage kilometer part of the equation. That is basically the tonnage and the kilometers for trip 1, the tonnage and kilometers for trip 2, etc. So that you could imagine that a container journey is consisting of multiple legs or multiple trips. And if we sum all these parts up, then we get to the full picture. And this is in more technical terms done by adding the vessel IMO number. And what is an IMO number is like not a call sign, but like a number code for each vessel that's unique. Along with the port or loading port destination, this is put into our Ocean IO data platform, along with metadata for the vessel. That is, what type of vessel it is, what is the container capacity, age, and so on, maybe also fuel types, along with historical data of similar journeys the vessel has done. Based on this, we can output, this was the actual distance traveled. At this point, it traveled this speed, this time, and there was this delays, there was these stops, and all the things we can come out, giving you the denominator of the equation above here, showing the tonnage kilometers. And then you are very close to be able to calculate the CO2 emissions. And this is one case. We could also say that if you have to choose between two different vessels going to a specific destination, which of these two will be the least polluting one? And then it's not an actual distance travel, it's actually a planned travel using the same formula you can go through and calculate what is the estimated CO2 emitted through this journey. And this is again something super interesting for the customers, for the cargo owners, because it enables the cargo owners to make the greener choice. Another use case is when the ships, for instance, backed up in mostly in US ports, but also in European ports, they are pumping up pollutants as they idle. And the picture on the right here is from last year from a port of Long Beach. You can see the container ships waiting at anchorage outside the port, waiting to get into berths to be discharge their containers. But when they're idle, they also are producing a lot of smoke. And you can see from the picture here, it's getting quite blurry. So this is again really important information. So the longer you wait, the more you of course also are emitting. And here again, Gatehouse Maritime, what we try to do is we try to create this transparency of each port in the world. If you choose this port or that port, what kind of effects will they have of the CO2 emissions? Because there is different waiting times, and taking the one where you can get the fastest in with the goods actually also amounts to the least amount of CO2 emitted. Again, the greener choice. And as a side note, of course, Port of Long Beach, Los Angeles, they're doing a super good job, and they're really focused upon this, and they actually moved out the anchorage areas last year further out to reduce the smoke and so on. So they are fully aware of that. So it's a high matter of interest. To create the transparency of what is the state of the port, how long time does a ship wait at anchorage before it can come in and discharge its containers. We have something called a port congestion service that shows for what is the average waiting time, the median waiting time, the worst case, best case for vessels in different kind of anchorage areas coming into a port. How many are waiting now? How many was waiting last month? What is our prediction for the future for how many will wait and so on? So we can give this kind of information to our customers, giving them the ability again to pick the greener port, the one that has the least amount of waiting time. And this is something we do calculate every 8 hours and make available through a RESTful API. That is something that's easy to integrate to and make use of for consumers. So this is just an example of another service necessary and also to create this kind of visibility for reducing zero carbon emissions for the ocean logistics. And that was actually my last more or less detailed slide. So in essence, what we do in Gatehouse Maritime is we focus a lot upon tracking containers. Where are they when they're ready to pick up? Which is again important, and also when will the ship arrive. But if you look at the ship here, there's 2 other questions we try to answer. How much does this ship pollute, giving you the option to make the greener choice? And what is the least polluting port available for this ship? And that was it. Thank you for your time. My name is Thomas. If you have any questions also afterwards, just please feel free to mail me, or interested in trying out this kind of products offerings, just reach out.
So thank you very much, Thomas. As a note to that, people will receive more information from Gatehouse and also the other speakers after we finish today. But there are 2 questions and 2 comments from people watching. One of them was route optimization can decrease at least 5% of fuel costs, and also this is for vessels. Do you agree, and is there a work being done in this area?
Yes, and this is again a super good question. We also have route calculations and different route options available in our platform. And these routes show you the different kind of paths the vessel can take to get to a certain destination. And please also recall that it's not you can just not sail wherever you want. Sometimes there is like a very low depth, so your ship has to be at low depth, and some has like a bigger depth, and you can move bigger ship through there. So yes, again, routes is an option. You can go in and look at different kind of routes. What does it mean? Very many of the container carriers, they actually follow the same routes all the time. But for instance, having this information, you can select the route that has the least amount of CO2 calculation. And this is, I think, it's quite important.
And something else adding on, which is that what the CO2 intensity is depends on the loading factor of the ship.
Yes.
Is there a way to account for this as well?
Yes, and this is also actually, in fact, in part of the calculation. So we do like a calculation of how many containers are loaded onto each vessel, and this is what goes into the calculation based upon the amount of booking numbers being done and so on. There are many different aspects coming into that, but that's a really good question, and it's an important part of the calculation.
And while I was listening to the presentation, you spoke a lot about giving the choice to the customer at the end. Is this drive coming from, let's say, organizations like the International Maritime Organization, or is it coming also from ship owners and suppliers and customers, consumers at the end?
This comes a lot from both the carriers, the ship owners, but also comes a lot from the cargo owners, the shippers, the ones transporting the goods. So all these transporting goods are often major companies, and they also have an interest of being a green company, also have a stake in this. So this is very, very much driven by cargo owners, the ones getting the containers shipped.
And have you found that with solutions like this, for example, companies always ask, well, how much does it cost and what is the return of investment? If I'm just finding how polluting I am, then what's the point?
Yeah. Again, that is some part of this is what is the point, but this is also living up to some sort of accountability of this pollution. And this is again being driven by cargo owners and consumers saying we want to know the greener choice. So therefore, it's actually very much also the cost of this is very much also carried by the ones shipping it. So I'm willing to pay slightly less and slightly more from shipping this container, maybe let's say €5 or €2, a significant amount compared to the full cost of the cargo. But I want to know how much is this contributing to CO2 emissions.
Thomas, thank you very much. As I said, people will be able to learn a bit more from Gatehouse and also your presentation and everything after. We will send more information to them. And we will be moving forward now, looking into mapping and ethical supply chains. I'm just going to bring not only his presentation, but also Peter Nededle from Segura. Peter, thank you very much. And the stage is yours.
Hi, Nick. It's really great to be here and good to see you again. Yes, I've had my mind blown this morning with all of the other presentations, and hopefully this part of my presentation, my brain works rather simply, but it's amazing to see what people are doing out there and how they're coming up with unique and novel solutions to the world's problems. And Segura, we're doing our little bit in the kind of fashion supply chain, and we really start with garment manufacturers and move down through the tiers of the supply chain. So you'll have seen lots of companies out there that deal with supply chain mapping. At Segura, we feel we have a unique solution that goes beyond that and into deep levels of traceability through the tiers of supply chain. And I'll come on to that a bit more at the end. But first, just want to talk about some of the issues, the reasons why this is important. And if you're involved in supply chains at all, you'll have seen all of these kind of things. And this, I could have probably filled about 5 slides of organizations, non-governmental organizations, governments, and consumer groups that are essentially highlighting the issues faced by people and the planet, and putting pressure on not just retailers, but all businesses across the globe to clean up their acts and yeah, look after people and the planet better than we do at the moment. Fashion supply chain, yeah, if you look at that, there are 2.1 billion tons of emissions, depending on which report you read these days. Fashion's responsible, it's either the second or third worst emitter in the world of carbon. So massive issues in there. Reporting, TCFD reporting, that's the Task Force for Financial Climate Related Disclosures, was adopted in the UK on the 6th of April. It became mandatory for businesses over £500 million turnover to report on their emissions. And I think this is a good start for the UK. I think what we'll see over the coming years is smaller businesses, suppliers to those large companies, being caught up in the law and reporting against it because of who they supply, having to report against it. So it's a good start, but I think this kind of legislation will get tighter. Then there's the investor pressure. Half of investors said they'd divest from companies that don't take sufficient action on ESG issues. And if you read that PwC report, it goes into a fair amount more detail about what they believe those ESG issues are. 83% of people that buy our products, they think that we should be actively shaping ESG best practice. And 65% of the world's economy has committed to net zero by 2050. So, so again, you know, almost 2/3 they're committed to cleaning up what they do in the world. But what are the problems if things happen? The spotlight is on all of us now, all of the, certainly in the retail sector, and we saw about just coming up 2 years ago, the issues with Boohoo, and there have been many others. The reason I've highlighted this one is that it's a marked difference from what had gone on in the previous decade or two. So when I started Segura back in 2011-12, we did quite a bit of research on how bad stories in supply chains or big retailers, how that affected their share price on average. And back then, there were a few famous stories that you guys will know about, but the share price of those affected companies on average moved downwards by about 1.3%. And then in the following months, you know, went back up and as the stories dissipated. Boohoo, their issues were back in July 2020, and we can see even in May of this year, their share price is 80% lower and has continued that downward trend. Now, I know people argue there's lots of other reasons why their share price has gone down, but the start of the decline was absolutely the supply chain issues they found in Leicester, and how that was reported, and investors moved away in droves. So you have the power. The reason this slide is in there is that I have conversations with the press on many occasions around those kind of stories, and they are looking for issues in supply chains on which they can report. And I often retort to them and say, look, the people we find that are managing supply chains are not the kind of people that want poor ethical and poor sustainable practices to be going on in their supply chains. I've never met anybody that is happy about the fact that there might be, you know, children 3 tiers down in their supply chain, and they're good people. So it would be better if we spun some more positive stories out there and showed what companies are doing to improve their supply chain. We hope to be part of that solution, and are being part of that solution with a number of large UK retailers. The issue that most of them find is that they just don't have the tool set. So most of the procurement teams, the sustainability teams, and the supply chain teams that we deal with are generally trying to manage their supply chains largely with, and I'm talking about beyond tier 1, on manual spreadsheets, manual processes, spreadsheets, and intranet sites. And they are very time consuming and very difficult to manage in that way. We see this in the Business of Fashion report recently, that a lot of the processes getting deep down into the supply chain and measuring what's going on beyond tier 1 is really difficult with manual processes. But if we're going to make a real change in the world, we do need to know who the suppliers are of our suppliers and right down the chain to raw materials. Surely you can only make real ethical and smart decisions if you know ultimately where your stuff comes from. I'm not just talking about the garment manufacturer, I'm talking about, you know, the farms and where the raw materials come from that go into our products that are sold out in the world. And it's that true traceability that's really important to making better decisions about what goes into our clothes. About 12 months ago, we partnered with River Island, who approached us for a solution. They've made 12 commitments for people and planet, of which they're directly aligned to the UN SDGs, and Segura has played a large part in helping them uncover the various tiers of their supply chain in more detail. So order by order. And what's different about Segura in this space is that you'll find plenty of software providers out there that will give opportunities to map supply chains and uncover suppliers down the tiers. Most of them are based around sending questionnaires and surveys out and asking for details from one tier to go down to the next tier. What differentiates us is we are driven by purchase order. So we take a data feed from the retailer's purchase order system that's ingested into Segura, and then the garment manufacturers place orders for components through the system, and the component suppliers will then declare where they got the items that go into their products, and so on down through the chain, bringing deeper traceability. Segura, the critical thing for anything these days is, yes, the software that we provide is really sophisticated, but it's very simple when it comes to concept and use for retailers and their suppliers. And we've come up with and optimized the way that we can deploy this software. So for large software companies, you may find, you know, timescales for deployments run into many months, if not years. For Segura, we're not. We are a solution we are a solution of software for a problem, but we're not usually an IT project, and we can sit discreetly outside of that. The only integration that we need is for an integration with the purchase order system of our client. Beyond that, the system takes care of itself through the chain. So you'll see on this slide, and I'm not going to go into massive detail because of time, but it will be shared afterwards, a 3-phase deployment. Phase 1 being that we can map that tier 1 very quickly and start bringing in data for you from audits, start managing corrective action plans and doing that, and the system will automate a lot of that collection for you, meaning that you can deploy with us and within 2 weeks you're receiving actionable data, you know, so very quickly. Just want to talk to you briefly about a few things that have come up in the last few months. So we're Segura itself obviously is an order traceability system, so we're managing orders through the supply chain, and whilst we do that, we are able to leverage that position to be able to collect data on behalf of retailers for whatever it is they want to get more detail on. What we've done recently is created, and Danny and the team created risk mapping. So we're taking data from numerous third-party sources, and what you can see there on the right-hand side of your screen is little flags, which are suppliers all around the globe for a particular retailer, and you can see the risk map on countries, and that's you're able to click and change what the overlay on there and where the risks lie. So you might want to see carbon emissions, you may wish to see human rights issues, and you can flick through those different views to see the risk that is going on in those areas. And then there are opportunities to amalgamate that data and combine risk for sources. And the data in the system is getting richer all the time. So we're using third-party sources. We're also using other sources within the retailer and other brands as well to be able to bring that all together. Yeah, that was a quick whistle stop, but essentially just to recap, we're a system that that starts at the garment manufacturer, moves through the levels of the supply chain, brings that traceability, and then by having the traceability and knowing where your suppliers are, you're able then to deploy your ethical programs, sustainability programs much more diligently, and with the knowledge that that it's the people that you want to be working with that you're actually working with, and not any third-party unwarranted suppliers that you might not want in there.
Thank you very much, Peter. In just a moment, we will bring the other participants in the panel. But before I do that, is it surprising that fashion retail is, or first of all, do you think that fashion retail is the most unsustainable part of retail and logistics? And would it be surprising if it is?
I don't think it's number one, but it's very high up there. And that part of the problem that we have in the fast fashion industry, and we looked at Thomas's presentation just before mine on shipping, and I'm sure the people here will know much more detail than I do, but the difference between air freight and shipping from a carbon footprint perspective is colossal. And what we're seeing a lot in fast fashion is things being shipped in or flown in from the Far East to meet very tight deadlines. So that doesn't help. There's wastage and emissions all across. And one of the things that I often say at this point, it's very different, the carbon footprint of an item made in Turkey shipped to the UK, where all the components come from Turkey too. That's very different from an item made in Turkey where all of the components come from China, India, Bangladesh, are shipped into Turkey and then shipped to the UK. And for most retailers and most brands, they don't know, they can't see that deep into their supply chain. So until we uncover that, we're not going to change. And TCFD that came in the report that companies that estimate 80% plus of emissions in fashion are in the deeper, darker depths of the supply chain that most retailers have no visibility of.
Well, with that, I'm going to bring Paul Sweeney, who is from Descartes, as well as Jonathan Lund from C2 Cyber, and Antony Francis from Endava. And also in just a second, Erik from Sony and Elenor Smith from Slave Free Alliance, who should be with us in just a moment. Yes. Welcome, everyone. I would like to start with Elenor with this one. Elenor, you are part of the Slave Free Alliance, and if you're looking from where you work into the supply chain, how do you understand sustainability? What is sustainability for you in the area?
Sure, thanks, Nick, and thanks for the opportunity. So for me, reiterating really what Peter said, I've come from a similar corporate background, working in supply chains in retail operations. And for me, it's about that sustainable, to be able to have a sustainable business, you need a sustainable workforce. And, linking that back to the transparency and the mapping piece, these really are tools, in terms of the social element, these are really tools that you can arm yourself with, not only for the carbon element, but also for the people element as well. knowing where you're sourcing from and knowing the issues down your supply chain really does give you that level of maturity to be able to respond proportionately to any issues identified. So for me, really, it's about having that sustainable workforce within your business. And why it's important is well, we are respecting the environment and we want to respect the environment, but we also need to respect the people within it. So it's recognizing the people within our own operations, within our supply chains, and also the impact from where we're sourcing from across the globe.
And Jonathan, you come from C2 Cyber and specifically looking into cybersecurity. How does this reflect to sustainability?
Go ahead, Nick.
So how would you say that this reflects into sustainability?
So we started off certainly in cybersecurity and more vendor risk management. So trying to assess the risks in the supply chain for the public sector and the private sector. And that was as a result of some fairly major breaches in a couple of the intel agencies. And we've broadened that out recently because many of our customers have started to weave cybersecurity, the likelihood of breach, issues with data protection or similar into the G for ESG. And so they treat it all in there. Therefore, if somebody is going to put a large sum of money into a listed business, they want to know whether the value of their shareholding is going to go up or go down. One of the ways to make it go down quite quickly is to lose all your customers' data or all their credit card numbers or something similar. And that's the G. So that's where we started off. I've built a fairly respectable team here at C2. We had 2 more join yesterday in ESG specifically, but to bolster the environmental and the social. And in both of those lives pieces like modern slavery and how do you prevent boohoo from happening again in any organization. Back to Peter's slide earlier, it was a great presentation. Thank you for that, Peter. So one of the biggest challenges we've got, and I've come from an intelligence background, is where do you get decent data from, and where do you get information from the data? So having an overwhelming amount of data doesn't actually convey any information. You've got to parse the data. You've got to pull out the golden nuggets that might be useful. And so we're applying an intelligence-led approach in C2 to ESG. And one of the things we found most recently is it's a real mess, isn't it? So people saying that they are ESG data providers are literally just aggregators of huge amounts of noise from the internet. That doesn't help you make good decisions, whether as an investor or as an organization trying to become more attractive for finance, or simply to be a better corporate citizen and employ cleaner approaches to supply chain. So we're trying to do that. It's not that easy, but we've got some good tools and some good people. And
I also want to bring into conversation Paul from Descartes. First of all, do you agree that if you're looking out there, as Jonathan says, it looks a bit like a real mess? And why is it? Is it because it's just too expensive to work on it, or there is not enough social pressure?
No, I think it varies a lot. Like I think the use of technology to try and help with sustainability is a natural sort of choice out there. If you think of sustainability, the opposite is being wasteful, being inefficient with the use of your resources, and so on. So what we've tried, do within Descartes is help organizations utilize their resources more efficiently, be more optimal in the use of their delivery of logistics. Last mile is a big area for us, and the growth of last mile home delivery is an area that sort of we spend a lot of time looking to help increase that sustainability. Some of the figures we did looked at last year, I think across the world globally, probably just over 600,000 sort of metric tons of CO2 being saved by our customers by using technology to achieve that. I think it's over 2.8 billion sheets of paper that they've also sort of eliminated from their logistics businesses as well. So focusing in on that, sort of using technology to create better, optimal, more efficient, higher utilized resources out there within the logistics and the fleet world, and then eliminating, sort of by digitizing the logistics supply chains, just eliminating that wasteful use of paper, which is I think it's over 140,000 trees equivalent to by just digitizing the supply chain. So I think there's definitely low-hanging fruit out there. It's about wanting to do it and making it a priority. But there's definitely advantages technology can give today in there.
And Erik, one thing that I also asked Peter was, well, to change a bit, the question is, which one do you think is the most unsustainable part of the supply chain at the moment?
I guess these days, where do we start, right? There's very little that's sustainable as it is right now. We are seeing a lot of wastage in packaging. I see companies like ourselves are addressing a lot with regards to how do we do smart packaging, how do we recycle. And I mentioned in my own presentation that we have an objective of about the plastic that goes into our devices, as well as the components inside, that we establish either using fully recycled plastic and or having a circular flow whereby we can control of the devices that are coming in and either recycle them or reuse those in our flows or in our componentry. We are, when you're then looking into the logistics, the actual transports, having a few hundred ships lying outside Shanghai is a problem, which is has its root causes. But if you're looking at the U.S. West Coast, where you have the similar situation, which is more a question of the terminals. One aspect, the terminals not running at full capacity is certainly not optimal. And then again, everything is then reinforced by containers cannot move up. There's not enough truck drivers. There's not enough chassis, and so on and so forth. So it's really a challenge what we're seeing now to deliver an optimal logistics chain from end to end. So again, it's just a question of where we prioritize, and each of us play our role with what we do. And I think that the current situation that we're seeing is going to be the perfect business case on how the bullwhip effect plays out. And for us, we are looking at 12 months plus lead time on certain components, and that's ultimately we'll see a correction at some point in time. And by doing so, that's very expensive, the way that we're all operating today.
And Antony, to you, one thing that Paul mentioned was the low-hanging fruit. Is this the way to go forward? Let's just do the easy bits first and then think about how to approach the hard things. Oh, just a second. You're muted.
Sorry, that's a classic mistake. Paul was just saying about the paperwork that's involved with shipments, both on the inbound and on the reverse side. It's staggering the amount of paperwork that you file on a freight forwarder has to file today, and there's a lot of work being done on what they call the e-bill, which is the electronic bill of lading, which will digitalize a lot of that piece of the supply chain. But there's still a pouch goes with every shipment. It can have up to 25 different documents in there. It's worse than buying a car when they make you sign all those additional pieces of paper, and that may be something purely on the US side, but you even have to sign one single sheet of paper saying that the odometer on your car is 0 over here in the US when you buy a car. So, but on the freight forwarding side, there is the certificate of this, the certificate of that, and it's all different paper, and it's in a pouch attached to the package, and ultimately that's going to go away, and that's going to be a huge. When you think of the number of when there were 88 shipments offshore, 88 container ships sitting offshore at the end of the last year in the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach, I did a short calculation, and that was $36 billion worth of product sitting on those ships. And it's, so you think of that, and then you think of the finance cost of that. And I can't remember who said it. I think, Erik, you said it earlier, the cost of them just turning circles offshore there for weeks is huge. So there's that's sort of low-hanging fruit that you can eliminate immediately. And on the reverse side, it's pretty much similar, because you're just turning a process the other way around on the way back. The more you can have people dropping off packages at a consolidation point, for instance, that's a great tool. Having on the forward side, a lot of so Amazon here, we have a series of stores in the States called Whole Foods, and they actually have, because they're now owned by Amazon, Amazon have got lockers, the electronic lockers in each of those stores. So they're putting they're not delivering to a person's house. They can actually go to the Whole Foods when they do their shopping and pick up a package there. That avoids the last mile. And, as we said earlier, the last and first mile are just horribly expensive.
And I think on that point as well, Antony, on consolidation, that is sort of, we did a survey, a pan-European survey last year of consumers about sustainability, and I think it was 31% of consumers were willing to have consolidation of their their deliveries to home across a week, so that they could be delivered in one go. And I think it was a similar number, 30%, that were prepared to have it consolidated with their neighbors' deliveries. So if they're delivering this area today, then put mine in with my neighbors and I'll have it delivered today. So there's definitely a acceptance of that out there in the consumer community.
And just wanted to go back to Peter on something which we're talking about, the suppliers and going down the list of suppliers. How can you engage productively and efficiently with people? And you said, well, they just send a form there and you need to fill this form, and on this form the people will say, yes, we are doing the right thing. But in practice, does this mean that companies know what is happening?
Yeah, I think there are a few different solutions competing out there, and I think where you have a number that are looking that they deploy a platform, and effectively the tier ones are asking the tier twos for information, tier twos for tier three. And that information is uploaded, but in our experience, and we've analysed this, the return rates are 20% at best. Some get as much as 25, but that's where they tend to run out of steam. And I think I probably didn't make it exceptionally clear in my presentation, but the difference between us and those other players is that order management, that we are taking the purchase order and we're taking the bill of materials, and the orders are flowing down. Now, what that does to a supplier is say, okay, this is the way I receive my orders. Now I've got a request from my customer for more information. If I don't give them this information, does that mean I don't get any more orders? Now, that might not be, it's a tacit threat, for want of a better word, but it gives a motivation to share that information. And what we find is return rates from the automatic chasing from the system get into the high 80% very quickly. And I mean, within 2 or 3 weeks of asking. And that leverage makes a huge difference. And so it's the classic thing of every person in the world, isn't it? It's the what's in it for me scenario. But I think what we've also worked on, and Danny and the team are brilliant at this, is just making the system simple, really easy to use. And if you're uploading a document, it's 3 or 4 clicks. It's not, 20 minutes of hard graft to get that information uploaded. So you've just got to get, and we're getting slicker at that all the time. But I think the other important point, that going back to what Antony was talking about in terms of consolidation, there's consolidation and cooperation and collaboration that can happen all over the industries, all over supply chains. And the thing that we need is really good systems to get people working together. And we're doing our little bit in that with getting retailers gathered together so that they can start even jointly consolidating bits of the supply chain. One example that is quite interesting is, it takes 10,000 litres of water to make one pair of jeans through a normal process. There are processes out there that use no water to dye a pair of jeans, and to do those kind of things. The problem is that those industries are not at scale yet. But if we can collaborate dozens of big retailers to say, look, that's the way we want our jeans and denim creating and manufacturing, then those players can take that scale and start to invest, and that will happen quicker. So I think we need to start working together more and more, and get away from this element of that competitive pressure.
Mm-hmm. And this feeds into directly to people, Elenor. So do you feel that companies, as Peter spoke in his presentation, supply chain managers are not bad people. They want to do the right thing, but they just don't know where to start, even trying to find it?
Yeah, it's a great question. In my experience, in both retail environment, I mean, it's a very loaded question, but I'll have a go. In retail environment and also in the NGO space as well, is that people don't want to be non-compliant because they're choosing to be complicit. They're non-compliant because they don't know how to be compliant. A lot of these standards across businesses are very voluntary, and it's very driven on that reputational damage piece. So it's really interesting when you see guidance out there that is completely ambiguous, and you're expecting suppliers to maintain that. You're also expecting suppliers to adhere to stipulations that potentially the UK Modern Slavery Act, they may not be in scope of it, they may not understand it, it's not very clear in terms of actually what they do. So yeah, having that real clear guidance in terms of, on the back of the transparency piece, on the back of the mapping, having that real clear, this is what we want, this is what we expect of you, and this is how you achieve it, and providing that what a good job looks like.
And Jonathan, on this one, do you think that, not necessarily looking from the point of people, but from the point of cybersecurity, it's sort of a similar situation where I want to do the right thing, but where do I start?
So there's a problem, and I think some maturity is being seen, but everybody is on a journey. So whether it's information assurance or the Modern Slavery Act in the UK, or even the environmental reporting that needs to be done. So here, as soon as a business, regardless of whether it's listed or not, trades at over £36 million, you have to put into your annual accounts the nature of your employee demographics, how many people you've got from particular backgrounds, how you're helping people to grow in their careers. There's quite a lot of detail that you've got to put in there about your apprenticeship schemes and everything else. So all of that goes in. At present, it's unstructured. So, and one of the ways that this is made complicated for people trying to get some information out of the data is that it's all in PDFs, and it's in a form where people can't exchange the data in an efficient way. And to Antony's point earlier, you get thousands of PDF pages full of data, but you have to read them as a human being. There's no way of importing that like company accounts in IXBL or whatever that format is. And that needs to improve. The other thing that needs to improve is the idea that anybody is better than anyone else. So in cybersecurity, we're all on a journey. So there's an adage that if you're a business and you think you haven't been hacked, you should probably have a closer look. Because everybody has been rolled over to a greater or lesser extent, whether that's an insider threat, or if you're an interesting business with lots of points of attack, that might be a more sophisticated adversary. But everybody has lost a USB stick on a train, or an intern's left their iPad in a bus, or whatever it is. That's a breach under the data protection regulations, all of which investors look at quite closely now, because it's amazing how much IP you can fit on one iPad. So they're looking at all of this stuff. And I think the area that we need to see the most improvement in is organisations admitting and acknowledging that we're all on a journey. So one of the key points that we operate to here in C2 is that we're collaborative with both our clients and their supply chain rather than punitive. And we've seen some fairly major consultants and consultancies go into places and explain how you could do this much better. Here's your report card, it's an F. Well, everyone knows that. That doesn't help. The bit that helps is getting from F to at least a C, perhaps, if not an A. And we're on a journey. So the key thing for us is to make sure that it's collaborative. And we help them with the forms of the art. And so, Elenor, to your area, I guess the 6 tests in the UK's Modern Slavery Act, lots of people don't have those in their policy. Therefore, the policy is not worth the paper it's written on. And they're fairly simple things to incorporate. But people need some expertise that they might not be able to afford to pay for. They don't have time to integrate, and they certainly can't hire somebody full-time to manage it. So they need to avail themselves of expertise.
And you're absolutely right. You know, we're waiting for this legislation to be passed. There are 6 reporting areas whereby it is at the minute voluntary for businesses to be able to kind of demonstrate what they're doing in this space. And, you know, that's where Slave Free Alliance can assist with the members in terms of, right, what's your commitment? Let's get you to the reporting standard, which we expect to be rolled in at some point. And then look at where do you want to go with that? What activities, what commitment do you want to deliver throughout your supply chain, and helping them and achieve that through, you know, use of various different activities and tools, and really understanding the risks across your supply chain in this space. You know, it's crazy how there are a lot of businesses who are in the threshold of reporting for 36 million and they don't have a clue. And they're not reporting it either. And they're not reporting. You know, originally when when the Modern Slavery Statement Act first came out, it was the guidance was pretty sparse, and the challenge is tell us what we need to do, tell us what a good job looks like, because you could put we've got slaves in our supply chain, this is our statement, and you'd be compliant. So it's really about understanding, you know, what's the best practice, what can we do. Let's be completely truthful, 77% of businesses expect to find modern slavery somewhere within their supply chains.
And I think one of the key challenges is if we could all, and this isn't going to happen, but it would be great if people could stop the greenwashing and the social washing and the and all this stuff in social media about how fantastic they are. It's very complicated to build a electric vehicle without rare earths. In fact, it's not actually possible. So someone's going to have to dig them out of the ground. And we need to make sure that that's a sustainable process. And recycling, arguably, is the area where battery electric vehicles, at least, we need to make more progress. But denying that there's quite a lot of cobalt and lithium in these things, and it's going to have to be extracted from the earth, is a bit pointless. So the greenwashing piece is just, it's like smoke and mirrors. And I'm the CEO of a startup. I know all about smoke and mirrors. But in ESG, we probably shouldn't be blowing quite so much of it around. It's not helping.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? It's right, like understanding, you know, the proportion of cobalt, for instance, that's coming out of the DRC. You know, we're talking over 70% of the world's demand.
Yeah. And I wanted to, sorry to interrupt you, but I wanted to move on the other side of looking into what is going to happen as an expectation and as a wrap up of everything in the near future. And Erik, if you're looking into technologies that are going to shape how we react to sustainability problems and even how we think about it, what is your expectation?
Well, I was talking about in my presentation the move of getting a much greater granularity in our understanding of what is happening and being able to act on that. I think that's the key thing. For those that are interested, that then a Unifeeder, which is now a DP World company, came out with an actual carbon calculator as I think the only shipping line that has it today, whereby you can actually get your actual carbon footprint for your transports. They as Unifeeder are, they're doing a lot of short sea operation, a lot of feeder operation for the carriers. So you cannot do the calculation for every box. However, it is certainly interesting to see then how companies are acting to this. Some prefer to stay the known course of working with the statistical models they're using, and then getting an average picture of what possibly it might be per cargo ton mile, or whichever metric they're using. And others take up the challenge and say, okay, now we know what we can do, and that means, can we plan around, what do you call a dense shipping period, and so on and so forth, to improve the overall footprint, right? So it's very much a mindset change that we're looking for, right? A lot of people would be pushing back and be scared about actually seeing what is happening, and then coming out from the darks of that. Then we'll start to see people acting on it in a constructive way. The other aspect, I do believe that we'll see a lot more with AI and machine learning, is that we will see a lot more predictive tools coming along, whether it's in the context of what I described, or predictability in terms of your planning. You had Gatehouse on earlier in the program, and we have started working with Gatehouse to cover sort of a missing link in what we can show in terms of our visibility, what's happening out on the ocean when we lose connectivity with our normal devices, right? And that means that we can start working with their ETA prediction algorithms together with our ETA prediction algorithms. So we are, combining what we know and what we see based on the modes of transport we have good insight into, together with what they have, right? And that means that ultimately you can have a more tighter planning with the or more correct planning with the positive outcomes of that.
And Paul, as a summary, where do you think we will be in a year's time, or maybe even more longer?
Okay. Well, I think in summary, I would say that there's, what we're seeing from the research that we've carried out across consumers in Europe, there's a growing sort of focus on, for instance, home deliveries. I think it's 71% of consumers consider the environmental impact of their home delivery. If you look at the 18 to 24-year-olds, that rises to 86%. So there's a growing sort of pressure going to come on to retailers and the logistics business that serve those retailers to really start addressing sort of the eco impact and sustainability that they have there. So things like, sort of giving consumers the option to opt in to an eco delivery, be that consolidate across the week, consolidate in my neighborhood, whatever it may be. I want to opt in to an eco delivery. Those are there now. There are people out there that are doing that today. Clients in UK and across Europe, and then the picture that of Long Beach and the containers, the ships coming into Long Beach, on a different scale. You have that at pretty much every distribution center across Europe today. You have trucks, idling, waiting to get to the dock door. Again, deploying today in the UK to two of the major grocers in the UK, solutions enable them to address that issue, to make sure that they minimize that sort of wait time and idling to get onto a dock door. So there are solutions there today, and I would agree with Erik that artificial intelligence and AI techniques coming in to maximize the efficiency of these solutions will move it rapidly over the next 3 to 5 years. But today, there's nothing except complacency that stops organizations taking action on how to optimize their resources and be more sustainable.
And finally, Peter, are you optimistic about what is to come then in the sustainability area?
Yes, I think in terms of certainly what we're seeing in our business, and I'm seeing across a number of businesses, is a desire and an impetus and a passion for being more sustainable, more ethical in procurement. And and that's now the conversation. I think we discussed this before, Nick. that the conversations we have are not with sustainability managers and people of that level within organizations. I'm often talked to by CEOs of large retailers, large brands here, because it is a board level issue, and it's the kind of thing that keeps them awake at night these days. And I think with that kind of impetus from that level moving through organizations, yes, we can be confident that things are going to get better. Absolutely.
And Antony, how about your expectations?
Well, I think the obviously more and more returns are going to happen, so consolidation is going to be a big one. The ability to digitalize the process is going to be key. I don't think we can predict the amount of returns. It's very difficult because it depends on the consumer behavior of how they do things. But certainly and I think in the US particularly, people are going to get dragged to the table screaming probably before we have a bigger impact as you're having over in Europe.
And Elenor, do you agree that it is in the UK specifically, if you're looking at the UK market now, that people have already woken up and it really is having a true impact on what is happening?
I definitely think there's traction in the UK. There's legislation in the UK. There's legislation moving across different countries of the world in relation to the modern slavery space, and the fact that it does start top down, get my teeth back in, whereby having that, that engagement across the board to be able to filter across the business, and then understanding where your risks lie, and understanding, the risks in the supply chain in terms of that labour supply, particularly in an exacerbated time where there are labour shortages, is understanding where can you provide that labour short notice, where's it coming from, who's providing it, what checks are being on them. So I think, as a general in the UK, I think there is consumer drive, the awareness is growing, and in turn, with legislation combined with that, I think companies now are getting to a point where they understand that something needs to be done. Investors are taking more notice, consumers are taking more notice. It is now being asked of from legislation. So there is definite traction being gained in the UK, yeah.
And just before we finish, to the final one to Jonathan, which a lot of people on the panel and today we were talking about digital and digital supply chain and how things will go digital. Are we ready from a cybersecurity point of view for this?
Well, not from my observation. I think people that whose area of expertise is moving the incredible volumes of freight around the world. And I spent a long time in the Navy, used to watch it sailing past. They're a lot bigger than aircraft carriers. And they have a specialization. Cybersecurity in the maritime environment is getting more important. The IoT on boats and what's in each container used to be a lot simpler. Now it's pretty complicated, and it will only get more complicated, I would venture. And so securing that chain, and we saw this with actually in the COVID pandemic with the vaccine cold chains and so on. Lots of work was done to make sure that that was done in an efficient manner, and that the right level of vaccine got to the right place at the right temperature, and that there was an assurance that it hadn't gone out of scope in terms of temperature during the transit process. So I was quite impressed with that, and I think that's being rolled out into freight more widely now. A lot of things were learned very quickly. Is it all secure? No. One of the reasons for that is that ships are now connected the whole time, whereas before you used to slip forward, slip aft, get rid of the shore power, and you're on your own. Now you're just connected to the internet, and everything's still connected, even if you're in the middle of the Atlantic. So has the security model caught up? Is there somebody on each ship who is the equivalent of a floating CISO? I would venture not yet at this point. And are the ships considered part of the cyber environment of the person that owns the ship? After what happened to Maersk, I think Maersk is ahead of the game in that. I think that as a shipping organization, they NotPetya disabled their operations. They didn't know what was on each ship where the ships were and what was in each container. They lost everything, right? They were using WhatsApp to talk to the captains of their vessels. So I think they're ahead of the game now. And they're sharing some of that. There's quite a lot of sharing going on from the companies that have the resources to design secure things with their smaller industry colleagues, and that's great to see. But they're not secure, and I think taking precautions is important. So the amount of companies we bump into where they haven't got two-factor authentication turned on their email or whatever it is, so they log in with a simple password and no challenge, no 6-digit code, and all that stuff. These are basics, and they apply to everything. And I think even just doing the basics would make quite a big difference. This isn't about spending millions of pounds on some managed SOC SIEM service. You don't need to do, well, some people need to do that, correct myself. But the basics are often missed. So I think to get secure, we need to focus on those actually.
Well, thank you very much for everyone and everyone watching. You can learn more about the different topics if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. A lot of video interviews with the majority of the people that you see now, and also some of them that were part of the event earlier today. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.